And we are live, folks. It's my good fortune today to have with us Aleks Svetski and Mark Moss. And Alex, if I said your last name right, I apologize there, but that was my best go at it.
It's all good, man. You're good. No one can say it. Not even I can say it. So it's all good. That's why I picked it.
So anyway, just before we start here, I just want to remind the audience or anybody watching this video in the future, I will never contact you for any personal information or private chat, etc. in the video comments. Just because you see my logo or my likeness does not mean it's me, and I will never ask you for private chat on WhatsApp or something like that. Please don't get scammed by people that do that, because there's lots of them out there. With that, Aleks and Mark, thanks for being here today. And I'm going to let y'all decide who goes first and things like that with responses. So can we start out with both of you? Just give us the elevator speech of your background and how you kind of ended up where you are in the world today and what you're doing.
Age before beauty. Go for it.
Well, I guess that's me then. Yeah, man, shoot. Super high level view, I guess. I'll go way back to the beginning, which is my parents were, I grew up in South Texas. My parents were very politically active, grassroots conservatives. And politics is still something discussed around our table today. My grandfather is a decorated World War II vet. My father flew jets in Vietnam. And I just thought I would just grow up and go to war one day as well. It's kind of the lineage that I had. I was born into a military family at the time. So that gives you a deep background. Fast forwarding, right out of high school, I started buying bank-owned repos. So houses directly from the bank. They had so many of them, they just couldn't get rid of them. They were given away. So I just jumped right into what might be considered an investing game. I fixed and flipped like over 100 properties. So I don't know if I was a real estate investor or was my business. The lines obviously are very blurred. Built up multiple businesses, Fortune 500 exit. And about 2015, I started buying Bitcoin. And I just, for the first time, had like a little bit of hope. I was like, oh, we finally have a tool that we can win. And I got to tell as many people as I can about this. And so I started creating content to talk about Bitcoin specifically. And I haven't shut up ever since. And so here I am still today talking about it as much as I can on the radio, on podcasts, on my YouTube channel. And now with the book as well. So that's a super high level view, I guess.
Aleks?
Cool. Guess it's my turn. So yeah, if I go back a little bit, so I went to university as an engineer. I was very good with like physics and math and all that sort of stuff. And I ended up dropping out of university because I decided to put all my scholarship money on the stock market. I taught myself how to trade options and warrants, thought I was a fucking genius, made a bunch of money. And then along came 2007. It was actually 2007 where I lost everything and kind of bled into 2008. And that kind of put me on the trajectory of trying to figure out, you know, what in the flying fuck did I do and why? And I basically went down the whole gold silver rabbit hole. Like I'd watch things from, you know, Mike Maloney and Doug Casey and Max Kaiser and Gerald Celente, all the old school guys who, you know, many of them actually through Mark, I've had the pleasure of actually meeting. And yeah, I kind of went down that rabbit hole. You know, I'd heard of Bitcoin in passing. I can't remember if it was Max Kaiser jumping up and down on a couch or some shit, but you know, I never took it seriously. I was like, internet funny money, whatever. I'll stick with my, you know, gold and silver. And I did that. And, you know, I ended up kind of getting out of gold and silver right at the peak, which was really good. That sort of got me out of the shit that I was in, you know, in the previous sort of trading debacles. And then I kind of just went on this entrepreneurial spree. Like I built hospitality businesses, I built some tech businesses and all this sort of stuff. And it wasn't until probably 2015-ish where I started getting back into Bitcoin, but not in any significant way. Like I just had this junkie friend of mine who was like, hey bro, have you heard about this thing called Bitcoin? And the conversation kind of went from there. And it was 2016 where I started, you know, taking it a little bit more seriously. And obviously 2017 onwards, down the rabbit hole, writing, producing content, built a company around Bitcoin, all sorts of other things. And here we are. Yeah, similar to Mark, just won't shut up about it. We wrote a book together and here we are on a podcast, 2022, opposite ends of the world, still talking about the shit.
So when you first reached out to me, Aleks, I was looking for people for the Bitcoin breakout. I'm going to kind of put this on both feeds because I think this is more of a broader topic. We're going to dig into Marxism and the book that you and Mark co-authored called the UnCommunist Manifesto. Can we start out? And again, you guys, yeah, and we'll get it up on the screen, the sign on the screen too, Mark, in just a bit. But can you guys again pick who goes first? But can you start off with like just understanding Karl Marx and Marxism? I'm amazed today at the broad embrace of Marxism that I see throughout my country. I'm 50 years old. I went to school in the 80s. Teachers weren't, exactly, diehard conservatives or anything, but they really weren't thumping the Marxist Bible at you. We did discuss it and talk about it. I didn't see many people around me, my cohorts or anything, get pulled into Marxism. And today I see it like fully embraced. And part of why I think that might be the case is the best way to sell a lie is with some truth. Do you guys think that there is some angle there with Marxism and why young people particularly so embrace it today?
Totally. Mark, do you want me to pick this one up or? Yeah, sure. Okay. I see you're muted anyway. So, all right.
Jump in.
For me, it's interesting. I'm obviously a lot younger, than the both of you, and well, maybe not a lot, but at least a decade. So, I've kind of grew up in, I think, probably the last generation before kind of smartphone native and all of that sort of stuff, before digital native. Like I still remember having no fucking phone, and playtime meant going outside, not staring at a screen. And that sort of all transitioned through my life. And I think, as you said, the sprinkling a little bit of truth. For me, one thing that the Marxists and everything did sort of well was they actually observed some genuine problems. Like there were problems in the transition from a feudal to a sort of more capitalist market-driven economy, like fundamentally. And during that transition, there's always going to be mess. There's always going to be exacerbations of real inequality. There's wealth transitions. There's all sorts of crap. So they pointed things out. But as we and I think Mark and I discussed this in the book, is that they completely misdiagnosed it. And the misdiagnosis comes from a number of factors. And, again, at the risk of trying to psychoanalyze Marx here, it's like you've got a very, 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 very large dose of envy. Marx didn't like other people who could outproduce him, outcompete him, and all this sort of stuff. So his whole tenet was around, kind of corralling the masses under the sort of auspices of things like equality, which was fundamentally inspired by the stupidity of the French Revolution, in fact. And he used those sorts of guises to basically bring numbers, because for the first time in history, particularly once again in the French Revolution, we saw what a peasant type uprising, what numbers would do to the higher classes, right? So he wanted to use that to take from others and equalize civilization or society by force. Now, he was, again, accurate. He pointed out things like, there's child labor, this person has more money than you, this and that. And basically touched on some surface level observations without digging any deeper. So it's insidious. And the problem with it is, me having been entrepreneurial all my life and very competitive, I've always had a disgust for the word equality. I've never liked it. Things like participation awards, that kind of crap started in my generation. Like the teachers came up with this brilliant idea to make everyone feel all warm and fuzzy by giving everyone an award so everyone feels equal and happy, right? That kind of stuff, it's once again, it's first order sounds nice. Like equality sounds nice on the surface, but what you have to do to achieve it requires some deeper thinking. And as I guess we've progressed over the last couple 100 years, we've grown a hell of a lot softer and less critical of things, and we don't think deeper. Or at least when I say we, I mean kind of the masses, right? Is the civilization has kind of geared itself towards the lowest common denominator. So whether it's information, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's whatever, it's all geared towards scooping up the dumbest of the dumb. And all of the information out there is kind of catered or geared towards the lowest common denominator, which by definition means it's not designed to be thought through. There's no deeper thinking. So it's just this surface level crap that people buy into. So anyway, I don't know if that answers the question much, but I think your observation is right in the sense that, you know, it's a few truths sprinkled in with these, you know, outrageous lies, which is effectively what Matrix 4, the movie, was. A couple little truths with this fucking Marxist agenda all throughout the movie. It was a disgrace.
I haven't seen the fourth one. I don't want to ruin the whole franchise.
Just don't do it, man. Don't do it.
Yeah.
I swear to God, I ruined everything after that. I'll never forgive myself for watching that.
Mark, do you want to add anything? Do you want to add anything to that? I mean, it seems like one of the things that I've noticed is the worse things are for people, the more they're willing to make a bargain, even if it's a bad bargain, for it to be a little bit better.
Is my mic on? Okay. I wanted to add a couple things to what Alex just said. I mean, he dug in really well. I just want to go back to a couple comments that you made when you were kind of framing it up, which is you said, you know, you went to school in the 80s and you didn't really learn about or didn't hear about communism, didn't really be or Marxism or whatever, socialism didn't really seem to be a thing. And I want to just push back on that specifically, because what's happened is that it's just been rebranded. And so everybody's been living in it. Everyone's been experiencing it. You probably just didn't notice it because you didn't really understand what it was, which is, I think, part of what Alex and I are trying to do. So we really saw communism sink its teeth into the United States back in the 30s, and it really made a concerted effort and really a strategic move in the 60s to get inside the education system. It started in the university. So, you know, you're growing up, you know, going to school in the 80s, you know, through, you know, elementary, high school, et cetera. You probably didn't notice it as much yet, but it was definitely getting its grip in the universities. And what I would say is just a couple things is that you didn't notice it. You didn't see it. Why does it seem to be a big deal today? But we've had it. So in the original Communist Manifesto book, Karl Marx lays out 10 points of what it takes to have communism, 10 points. And so, you know, there's several of these. As a matter of fact, I think 7 of the 10 the United States has, and they've been around for a long time. So number 2 and number 5 of the 10 points were both created simultaneously in 1913. That's a heavy progressive or graduated income tax and establishment of a national bank. So the IRS and the Federal Reserve were both created in 1913. So those have been around. You were living in socialism and communism. You just didn't know it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm talking more of like this full embrace of Marxism itself as a thing openly.
Well,
and I was a real small rural school is what I'm talking about. And they were like, all my teachers were like war vets or wives of war vets and stuff. So it wasn't pushed. It certainly was here. There's no doubt.
It was, but the point I want to make is it was pushed. You just didn't notice it.
Gotcha.
Most people didn't notice it, and the reason why is because they don't come out. So in the original book, Karl Marx says to summarize communism in one statement is the abolition of private property. So if they came out on the mountaintops in the 70s and 80s said, "Hey, we're going to abolish private property," like nobody would go for that, right?
Yeah.
So instead, it's the proverbial frog in the boiling pot. So they started installing communism or socialism or Marxism, whatever you want to call it, and you just didn't notice it. So number 3, abolish rights of inheritance. They have been continually ratcheting up the inheritance tax. Right now, it's whatever 50% on states over $1 million. Like that's insane. And nationally controlled communication and transportation. The government has continued to control more and more communications, more and more transportation. So that's been ratcheting up. It's been there since the 70s and the 80s. You just didn't realize that was part of communism. And so all of this has been ratcheting tighter and tighter and tighter. Most people haven't really been aware of it. Most people have actually been for it. Like, yeah, well, if it wasn't for the government, what about the roads?
Yeah.
So they'll say, well, we'll control the means of transportation. So we've been seeing this more and more redistribute the population, right? So all these things have been happening. Free and public education, number 10. So they've been happening. People wanted it, welcomed it. And finally, when the last piece is ready to be installed, which is the you'll own nothing, be happy part, which is abolish private property, now people are like, what the heck? But they've already got 9 of the 10 planks in place.
Mm-hmm. I want to just say something quickly about the schooling system, which I guess Marxism was always going to spread through the schooling system because schooling systems in general, they're Marxist by nature. Like if you think about the first people to really push broad-based government schooling was the Jacobin leftists in France. Like the free education for all it came out of the French Revolution and was pushed by Marx later. It was a communist agenda to school everybody, and they use the word education, but that's horseshit because education is something that happens all of the time. From the moment a child is born onwards, they are being educated. they're learning something. That is like that the brain is a sponge and it's a learning machine. That's what it does. Now, directed education is schooling, and government directed education is like indoctrination, really. And that's what these public schooling systems are. And I think that, because some people are going to, go out there and say, it's a conspiracy that the Marxists sort of went through the educational system. But whether it's a conspiracy or not, that is the point of contact for Marxism with respect to civilization, because that was and always will be their entry point. Is public schooling by definition is Marxist. There is no such thing, like in a capitalist, organic, free market environment. There is no fucking public schooling. There's private schooling, and a commercial enterprise would have to orient itself to make profit and not be communal. Otherwise, it would go bankrupt. So the communist schools would quickly disappear because they wouldn't survive. So I think this is all, once again, a function of the fact that, what is it? Point number 8, I think, in the 10 points on the original Communist Manifesto. It is, the public schooling systems is a Marxist doctrine.
Yeah, I think that all goes back to, I've always said that the human brain is a computer. It's a self-learning computer. And the less code in a computer, the more you can direct the code long-term if it's a self-learning computer. So the earlier you get the hold of a child and start planting ideas in their brain, the more you can set forward how that child will self-program as they transition into adulthood, if they even do, because somewhere along the way in all of this, we created this magical fake world of adolescence. Like this in-between phase. Like if you think back a couple hundred years, you were never an adolescent. You were a boy, and your job was to become a man in early as life as you can. And now we've taken adolescence from this like kind of middle teenager thing to like spans some of these people 30 years and they're still living as adolescents. And they talk about doing laundry as adulting. And I think that when you weaken a society's mind like that, then it becomes susceptible to the siren song that is the promise of socialism that has never been successfully delivered ever in the history of mankind, because it wasn't real socialism.
Thank you so much for saying that, because that's something, Mark and I have both been harping on it, but for me, it's been a big, big, big piece. I'm actually writing a piece now called, Bitcoin is responsibility go up technology. Like, fuck this number go up technology. It's like responsibility go up technology. And it actually transforms us into adults, because the definition of an adult is an individual who is responsible for the decisions that they make. And if you look at all of these kind of leftist ideologies, whether it's, the liberal end, the socialist end, or the extreme communist end, they're all about removing agency from the individual, because somehow the collective, or this magical entity called the state, can make decisions on behalf of everyone better somehow, which is complete fucking stupidity, number one. And not only is it false in the beginning, and here's the thing, I guess it's similar to what you said at the start. It's like, there are genuinely dumb people out there that if they're not told what to do, they'll kill themselves or something will go wrong, right? But the thing is, when you instead of those people being helped voluntarily by, the community or by their family or extended family or, private charity or tithing or something like that, what happens is the state extends that kind of almost derogatory helping hand to everybody, and then everyone starts to devolve their behavior. So they basically infantilize. They regress. They move from adulthood and they go into adolescence, and they basically become the lemmings that are on the movie WALL-E, right? That they're just completely dependent, overgrown children that are sucking off the teat of an institution that is supposed to give them everything they want, without them having to actually work for it. And it's truly a disgusting thing. There's nothing worse than an overgrown child. It's fucking disgusting. And we are surrounded by these people. When I think, I read, I know a lot of people don't like Rockefeller, for example, but I read his biography and it was fantastic. This son of a bitch was like, he came from nothing, genuinely. His dad was just a con artist, and he came from nothing and built an entire fucking empire from the age of 18. And he built it all up. He was like a hard worker, and he became a man at a young age, early family, the whole lot. And when I thought about that, I was like listening to the degree of business and maturity that he had. And then, the stage of life that he was at was like 26. Like he's already running this like, oil empire. And I thought, what are 26-year-olds doing today? Complaining about how hard, as you said, it's like adulting is like doing the laundry. It's too hard, bro. Oh, my Netflix subscription isn't working.
And I think part of this whole implementation is one, that prolonged adolescence, which it shouldn't even be a thing. And two is the destruction of community, because community is where that private assistance comes from. So I think back again to being a kid in the 80s, central Pennsylvania, coal town, USA. Every neighborhood had a name, even if it wasn't another town. And if you went a mile down the road, it was another town, borough, township, something like that. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew everybody. If you didn't know somebody, you knew somebody that knew that person. If somebody had a problem, people showed up to fix it. There were people in the community that if you had a problem and you didn't know who to go to, they'd make a phone call and people would show up and help you. And there was still the remnant of the strong nuclear family. And then I watched, and I agree with you, you kind of came up in the 90s, and that was kind of like, I think there's a documentary I call like The Last Great Generation, and like you still had that freedom and you still had that initiative. You could still go out and do things. And like the only thing you were really worried about would somebody tell your grandpa before you got home and you get your ass whooped, right? Because you did something. Because across that was the grandparent internet and the parent internet of the 80s and 70s. They would just make a couple of phone calls and you'd be in trouble before you got home. But that taught you to like be more innovative and get away with things. And now we have like people living closer together than ever before. We've stacked people into multiplex apartments, triplexes, tighter and tighter subdivisions, but they don't know anybody. You say like, well, who lives next door to you? They don't know, right? They never talk to them. Maybe they do this when they get the mail at the same time or something, but that's it. And by eradicating that, they've paved the way to make the state the support system more than ever before, because you've wiped out the natural innate support system of humankind.
Totally. There's something. So I was walking through Berlin with my girlfriend, and something I mentioned was that socialists and communists, funny enough, like people who believe in that ideology, and the reason we were talking about this was funny because we walked past a little cafe, which was a communist cafe, and on the front they had this like shirt which is COVID deniers not welcome here. And I was like, fuck you, I've got my little COVID shaming shirt that I'm gonna go walk in there with tomorrow. But she was just asking me, she's like, why are they the people who don't who are conforming? She goes like, she's from Dominican Republic, and she knows about Cuba and all this sort of stuff. So she kind of like grew up in quasi-communism where she lived, and she's like, she said usually the communists and socialists are the ones that are anti-authoritarian. And I'm like, yeah, it's like, it's so weird how something has like transformed, because they used to be the rebels, and now it's like they like something transformed. And I was trying to like pin it on something, and I want to do some more thinking on this, but what's interesting is that, and this is the fantasy of communism and socialism, is that they think that they're against all authority. So they try and abolish natural authority and natural hierarchy and natural connections. And in doing so, they leave a vacuum. And that vacuum is filled by the Stalins of the world, by the Lenins of the world, by the Mao Zedongs of the world, or something else, right? It's you break down those natural emergent. So every time there is a vacuum, something will fill it. And this is, once again, as you said, there's a vacuum of connection, the state fills it. There's a vacuum of local support, the state fills it. There's a vacuum of authority, the state fills it. Someone's going to come and fill that. And this is why something like communism and socialism, like I honestly still believe that there are some people who are communist socialist leaning, who genuinely have a good heart, but they're just fucking completely brainwashed. And they think that some sort of utopia is possible, but they just don't realize that you just can't remove something like authority or grassroots connection and things like that. So,
and that goes back to the education, the dumbing down of the people, right? And so what happens is, people who are blind, for example, they really develop their other senses. They can hear much better, they can smell much better, right? But the opposite is also true. When you have a crutch that you can lean on, then your senses fade. I know for myself. I mean, I've spent most of my life out in the mountains and out in the deserts, and I have this really amazing sense of where I'm at, direction, etc. But now, like, I drive with my Waze on all the time because it tells me where all the police are on the road. So I have this thing on all the time, and like, man, like I've lost my ability to navigate like I used to, right? And that's just like a small example. And so what we've seen is, to the points you were making earlier, I mean, boys at 14 used to be men, and now today, because of all these crutches that we give them, they don't. We continue to give more and more to the government, to the state, the nanny state. Take my education, take my health care, take my retirement, all these things. And so we just become weak, and it's just a process. If you go to other nations, which might have more of a open kind of a Marxist communist type government, take Mexico, for example, but they don't have the money printer. They don't have the fiat money system. And so the reality is most of their country is kind of left to fend for themselves. They don't have this welfare state. And so you don't see people dependent on the government because they can't be. There is no government handouts. And so all the people are working, all the people are industrious in Mexico, in El Salvador, in Central America, I'm sure other parts of the world as well. 14-year-olds are still boys. I mean, I'm sorry, 14-year-olds are still men. It's just in America, because of the crutch that they've been given, specifically because of the money system, it really enables that to happen. So that's back to, number 5, establishing the national bank. Let's create a bunch of money. Let's create a bunch of subservient people and make them dependent on each other, or on us, I should say.
No, you're completely right. I mean, when you make that comment about like Central American countries and Mexico, when in the 1990s, I spent a couple of years in Panama, but I did a 6-month deployment into Honduras, and I mean rural nowhere Honduras. There was a kid that came in our camp every day in shine boots. That kid was a hustler. That kid made probably more money than his parents did working on our, we would hire guys to work on road crews and stuff like that as well, and do some of the things that we didn't have enough soldiers to do. And that kid, he was probably 10, and he conducted himself like you would expect, not like you would expect a 16-year-old, because they had no choice. And, for that kid to get into that position and be able to be the kid that came into the camp every day, I don't know how many other kids he had to fight and beat off to be able to do that. But, one way or another, he did it. Now, both of you have kind of referred to like this vacuum, and then this stuff flows into it. I find that interesting because when Alec was talking, the term I wrote down in my notes here was bone marrow. And it makes me think of like when you want to treat a patient with a bone marrow transplant, the very first thing they do is they irradiate all your bone marrow. They create a vacuum, and then they, graft in this new bone marrow. And I look at society, and I kind of feel like and I want to transition to talking about the World Economic Forum and how Marxist ideology drives that. But that's kind of what I see is like this last 70, 80 years wasn't so much about implementation as it was about eradication of the core values that acted as in permaculture, when we don't want weeds to grow, we plant other plants, and we gild those plants together, and that prevents the invasion of the weeds. So if you want to get weeds in the garden, first you eradicate all the companion plantings, and then the weeds come. And I feel like that's what's been done here is we've eradicated the values and the morals, the responsibility, the cohesion, the culture, everything that existed. And now there's a vacuum, and it's very easy for this kind of transplant to take place.
I was trying to unmute myself. That was so well put. Honestly, that is such a good point. Is like, and you look at it as, I mean, what kind of philosophies came out the back end again of the French Revolution? It was all deconstructionist stuff. It was all an attempt to discredit, to ignore, to disseminate, to destroy the old. All of the institutions that came before, whether it was church, whether it was a patriarchy, whether it was the monarchy, whether it was whatever, like all of that stuff had to be destroyed and removed because apparently, according to Marx, the history of all of humanity was oppressor and oppressed, right? And we must remove the oppressors. And who are the oppressors? Anyone that I say they are. And that, like, that's a really good point, because what happens is, like, when you destroy, like, when we think about money, money is, this sort of representative capital of, what's sort of come before, the value, the product of one's labor, the value that they've sort of added and input into society. We have multiple forms of capital. We have intellectual capital, the stuff that we've learned. We have social capital, civilizational capital, capital of the buildings and the things and stuff that we've built. If we had to kind of destroy that every single generation, we'd still be throwing rocks at each other. Like, we sort of, each generation builds on the prior generation. And the thing is, when, let's just do a thought experiment. If we didn't build on the prior generation, we kept kind of repeating, the first couple things that we do, the first ideas that we would come up with are probably going to be dumb ideas by nature. So by removing thousands of years, by eradicating thousands of years worth of thinking and morality and institutions and patriarchy and hierarchies and all this sort of things which generally emerged, sure, there might have been some stuff that was stultified, some stuff that needed adaptation, evolution, and change or whatever. But by eradicating everything, the first ideas that have come to us are pretty fucking dumb ideas, which is, let me just tell everyone what to do. And once again, whether that's a Stalin or a Lenin or a Marx or whatever, it's that.
Yeah, and there's a couple things also in there. I mean, one, back to the hierarchies, and so in our book we talk about how these hierarchies work, how it's natural, how it's emergent, how it's built off of merit, so meritocracies, things like that. And so you see this in all areas of life. This happens, and it's because we're not all equal. We're all different. We're better and worse in all different types of areas. So I might be better in one area, and you might be better in another area. So we have all these hierarchies, and so when they want to try to establish them, and most of what they want to do goes against what human intention or human motivations or human incentives want. Human action, as we would say in Austrian economics, but they work against that human motivation of these natural hierarchies, but you can't get rid of them. And so you still end up with someone at the top trying to rule everything. So we'll just make most of the people poor and miserable, and then just a few of us can stay at the top. And the other thing is going back to kind of this fourth turning, or this generational theory, where you have the hard times create the strong men, all the way around to the weak men create hard times. Well, socialism creates enormously hard times, incredibly hard times, as we've seen through the Bolshevik Revolution and Hitler's Germany and Mao's revolution and countless other examples. And that hard time creates strong men to rise up, and those strong men rise up in that vacuum. Right, that's where Hitler rose up. That's where these guys rose up, and they raise up in that vacuum. They suck in that leadership, and so when you try to get away from it, it makes times extremely horrible. Someone's going to rise up and take that, and history shows it's typically been people with very bad ideas.
And I think one of the things that's rising up, and we think of these people as idiots, and I think that's a huge mistake. People that are psychopaths that run the world are not idiots. Right? I mean, people that are able to pull all of this off are not dumb. They may look like they have dumb ideas. That could be a head fake, or just because the ideas are dumb, but they're selling them anyway. But the WEF is probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest threats to the world today. And I just see this all funneling in and through that, to where you're basically getting a twisted form of so-called capitalism, like an incentivized to do what we say capitalism. Through the WEF. And then I see, no matter what political clown they put up as being different, they're all tied in through there. Even the people that are saying, I'm a Bitcoiner, and then 2 weeks later they're at WEF, like what's his name, Suarez from Miami, right? Talks real well, sounds real good. 2 weeks later he's at the WEF. How do you guys see the WEF playing into the concept of Marxism and this entire thing?
I think it's Marxism. It's just, you have to understand that Marxism has gone through several rebrandings, and so I think that's why it's important to kind of go back to the origins so you can kind of understand it. And so it's just been rebranded, and Aleks has said that Klaus Schwab could be the reincarnation of Marx, and so it's just this rebranding. But back to one of the things that you said there, they could be the biggest threat. Well, I believe they are. I believe that's pretty easy to see. That's quantitatively we can see because of the policies they're putting into place. He talks about their goal of getting 10,000 people in all these different governments, and how they've already achieved that with thousands of people across the government. So they're actively subverting the will or planting these people to turn the tides, and they're out in the open and saying it. So it's not hidden. They have them all listed, their pictures on the website. But one of the things that you said is trying to change capitalism, and so that's something that he's open. Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, the WEF, is openly saying he wants to turn capitalism into what he calls stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholder capitalism is basically, instead of shareholders, which own the company, private equity, they own the equity of the company. Again, abolition of private property. Instead of having shareholders, you would have stakeholders. And who are the stakeholders? Well, the stakeholders are the people who would have the stake in the company and the actions, or that would have the stake in the company. And who are they per his plan? Well, it's not super laid out, but basically the companies, the organizations, and the people in the WEF become the stakeholders of all the companies, which means they own nothing. I mean, sorry, they own everything and you own nothing. And so that's the goal. He calls it stakeholder capitalism. You still leave that kind of capitalism word in there. But the reality is his plan of what that is that everybody, the organizations and the people inside the WEF actually own everything. We're just renters and we own nothing. So super dangerous. It's out in your face. You know, Marx said, again, I said it earlier, if I summed up communism in one statement, it's abolition of private property. They say, you know, own nothing, be happy. And so we see the same things, same ideas over, and it's super dangerous.
Yeah, when I think of all this, I go back to 15, 20 years ago and starting to see articles come up that made the case for this in a totally different way, that if you're not thinking, it sounds like a good idea. Like, I remember reading this article about how we should lease everything. You should own nothing, right? And it was made from the concept of, like, let's look at things people buy that wear out, like carpet. So you buy your carpet, it comes into your house, 10 years later, it smells like dog, you have it tore out, you have new flooring put in of some kind. Well, who's responsible for the carpet? Well, the homeowner is. And their value proposition was, well, if the people that made the carpet or installed the carpet were responsible for the carpet, then maybe it wouldn't end up in a landfill. Maybe they would start building carpet that was, refreshable or that had some purpose after it was removed, because they would be responsible for it, as though they wouldn't just throw it away too. Like, why does the homeowner throw it away? Because it's the most expedient option at the time. And so I've seen that type of case being made that you're better off not owning things for like 20 years openly, but always painted with a different brush.
I think it's another case of things, truths that because there is sometimes, like, I've lived for a while trying to own as little as possible, and not because I believe in the WEF agenda, but because I don't like hanging on to shit. In fact, I went through quite a purge in my late 20s, and I just dumped everything, and I felt so fucking good. I can't even explain to you. Like, I got rid of cars, motorbikes, fucking clothes, and all sorts of shit. And I kind of, minimized my life down to like 2 suitcases and a very minimalist. Actually, you know what? Even the shit, I was renting a house and I convinced the landlord to fucking buy everything. So, I just paid them an extra rental amount per month. And it was just, I just felt so light. So there is an angle in there. The problem with it is that I actually think a lot of the early writings around that sort of stuff came from people who were trying to, be life hackers and stuff like that. The issue is when this stuff is taken on by some form of institution and it's then tried to, it's attempted to be enforced on people, right? And that's the thing. Like, if you want to own a house and do something, by all means. Like, the landlord that I was renting off had to fucking own the house and had to own the furniture in there. Like, and I was happy to rent it off her because I didn't want to bear the burden of that stuff. I much preferred, instead of buying a house, I wanted to buy more Bitcoin. That was my whole MO. So that's why I was kind of lightening my load. I moved everything. And for me, I went through this phase of trying to understand, property is that which you can most easily hold, protect, and kind of, secure under your domain. And everything seemed so shit in comparison to Bitcoin. So I kind of traded everything out. And the only thing I basically owned was Bitcoin and 2 suitcases, as I said. So there is, I think it's just another case of that sort of thinking. And to kind of come back to your point about the WEF and, them being dangerous and all this sort of stuff, I don't think they're dangerous because they're honestly so competent. So I would push back on that. I think they're dangerous because there's such a vacuum of competence. And what sort of happened is that the kind of people, I would say one of the 2 biggest things that destroyed the world were democracy and central banking, right? They're the 2 fucking ugliest creatures in the history of humanity. Is that democracy has given people this idea that they can have their hand in everyone else's pocket, and that some sort of suffrage or broad-based voting which is really an attempt to enforce what you believe should be done with other people's resources. It's such a retarded ideology. That kind of stuff has kind of slowly given us a world where power is concentrated in the hands of representatives who are effectively popularity contest winners. That's really all politicians are. It's like, who can promise the most, who can, tell you that, if one person says 5 + 5 is 10, the other one will say, well, in my government, 5 + 5 will equal 11 because I'm, the leader. And the next person will say, well, in my government, 5 + 5 will equal 13, they'll sort of keep bullshitting themselves out. Right. And the lemmings will believe that shit because the whole goal of democracy is to bitch and scream and yell enough so that your group is the net receiver of the redistribution of wealth. And in that sort of a modality, like I don't believe anything other than an institution like the World Economic Forum would emerge from that, because the underlying train tracks are pointed in that direction.
Sure.
We don't like. I don't. Yes, there is sort of conspiracies and sort of pushing behind the curtains and all that sort of stuff. But I kind of look at the meta argument, which is, of course there is. Of course, when the entire economic and social game that we're playing is a fucking fantasy, where the product of our labor doesn't actually reflect, the money, where the money is just fucking conjured up out of thin air, where, politics is basically a bunch of promise making and pretending that, if only I tell the oil price to come down, then maybe it'll come down, where economics is animal spirits and all this sort of shit. Of course, we're going to have these imaginary organizations which kind of fill the power vacuum and take over. It's perfectly fucking logical. So they're dangerous insofar as they've been able to kind of get to that stage.
Yeah.
But I don't give them that credence because they're so fucking capable. It's once again, it's the vacuum point that you made earlier. They've just filled the
Here's
vacuum.
why I say they're so dangerous. These are their partners. These are global corporations. These are the A's for those that are watching the video. These are just the A's, and you can keep going down. This is, again, I'm still scrolling. So imagine that we were going to play chess, and you're like, I think I can beat Jack in chess. He's not that great. And so, either one of you step up to the board and we play chess. But what if I get to set the board up? I get to play both sides for the first 70% of the game. And I set that board up to we're already 3 moves from checkmate, and now you get to play against me. It doesn't matter if I'm a better chess player or not at that point. And when I look at the positioning that they have, because that's just the corporate side, people say, do the corporations or the politicians run things? And the answer is yes, right? And they've got a lot of positioning done. I even saw the Orange Man himself with Klaus Schwab this year saying what a great job he's done. And so when I see that level of positioning and the population still believing they have some magical choice they can make with a ballot box, I see them as, and I agree with you, Mark, they probably are the biggest threat. The only reason I won't say they are the biggest threat, I'm not clairvoyant. For all I know, there's a dinosaur killing level comet on the way in tomorrow. I mean, there's the exception. So you see what I'm saying? The positioning these people have done is, well, it's incredibly dangerous. And the other thing that plays into this, and this comes from a philosopher, writer Bonhoeffer in Germany, going into Nazi Germany times, the theory of stupidity. And that's what creates this vacuum. And so that when the people are made stupid, they're actually more dangerous than people who have been made violent, because you can use violence to suppress violence, but it's very difficult to suppress stupidity. And in Bonhoeffer's work, he was very clear. I don't mean intellectually slow. I mean stupid, as in they are willing to accept ideology like, oh, this magical clot shot works even though everything says it doesn't, and we need to force everybody else to do it too. Things like that. And when I look at, like, when I dug into that theory, I looked out and said, man, it's everywhere. And now when I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, I thought it was everywhere. Like, that is the vacuum, this mass dumbing down of society. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're again intellectually slow. It means that they are stupid in behavior and willing to defend that stupidity from a weird type of New World tribalism.
They're the people that are called the lemmings that we know as the NPCs. It's literally fucking we're drowning in those. Mark, you were going to say something?
I wanted to go back to something that you had said earlier, and I think this is a big piece, because like you're trying to kind of understand who maybe potentially the biggest threat is, right? So who are they? What are their thinking? And so what we see from them, their line of thinking, is that, you know, people are stupid, people are dumb, and so we need to tell them what to do, right? And so we also see that, to the point that you made, that maybe violent people are easier to control. So there's this, they want people to be very predictable. They want to be able to control them. They want to be able to model people. And so they want to be able to put us on a spreadsheet and just kind of lump us all together and think this is the way it'll go. And so we see this, it's very pervasive in economics. So Keynesian economics kind of believes that we need to have a money that inflates, because if the money doesn't lose value, then people will hoard it. And we need to incentivize people to spend. So we need to have this money that incentivizes people to spend. Like, really? Like, people need to be incentivized to spend? Like, people, all they want to do is spend. Like, there's no incentive needed there, right? So that's like absurdity. And then the example you were using earlier about the carpet, right? And so maybe if the carpet company was responsible for the carpet, they'd find a way to be more efficient. Really? All businesses are trying to make more profit. All businesses, in order to make more profit, try to figure out how to be more efficient. By nature, this is emergent. We talk about it in the book, and how this capitalism process is not a political modality, that it's just emergent order. We're, as humans, we have ingenuity, and we're always trying to become more efficient with our scarce resources. And so my business, the scorecard of my business, how well I do in the marketplace, my bank account tells the market how efficient I am with my resources. And my goal is always to become more efficient. So this whole stakeholder capitalism, where, well, maybe if the carpet company managed to be more efficient. Oh, look, we don't need that incentive. We're already there. So I think it's pretty important to kind of understand where they're coming from and how that really misses the mark.
I think we need to be clear on defining what they mean when they use a word. So incentivized to spend. Like, I imagine both of you bought food in the last couple of weeks, and you were incentivized to spend money on food because you were hungry. Right? Or you knew that you would be, or maybe you wanted a nice car, so you incentivized to spend and buy a car because you needed a mode of transportation. Or like, I bought a house and I was incentivized to spend because I needed a place to live. When they say incentivized to spend, they mean irrational, continuous spending, because our entire system has been developed on the concept of, if we don't grow, it's bad. Like, if GDP is not higher, it's bad, to the point where we'll literally change how we calculate GDP so we can say it grew even if it didn't. And so when they say spending, what they're talking about is massive amounts of spending all the time and always more. And I agree with you. Human beings do not need a government incentive or a corporatocracy or oligarchy-driven incentive or a central bank-driven incentive to spend money on needs and true wants. The incentive is to get you to spend money on things you don't really need and you don't really want because you feel compelled to spend. And I think it works at the business level to have an inflationary currency to get businesses to spend, right? I don't think it works, though, on the average Karen or Ken, because they're not thinking that way when they go out and buy something. They just have money, it's burning a hole in their hand, and they need to get rid of it. And they don't understand, they have economic illiteracy, or they wouldn't be doing that. So I think it sort of kind of works, but it's also just a talking point that is designed to seduce people into accepting that this is the way it needs to be, that it wouldn't work if we did it any other way. I look at Bitcoin and I see like a totally different form of monetary instrument that I've seen in history of mankind. Is that if I had to describe it as a monetary instrument, not as just a thing, I would describe it as cap and fractionalize. So that there's always enough units, but there's never more. Totally. Right? It doesn't really matter that we're going to mine the last Bitcoin in 2050 or whatever, 2150 or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. The fact that we already know the total quantity has already established that cap. Yeah. It's just a matter of time till you get there. And then that fractionalization, there's like, because it's 21 million Bitcoin, but it's like, I think it's 21 quadrillion Satoshis. So that's enough for society to function if we're not trying to grow for the sake of growth.
Yeah, the artificial incentives is an interesting thing. It's like whenever you have to incentivize something artificially, you're going to have weird kind of downstream effects, right? Like, so if I don't feel like eating because I feel unwell, that's my body telling me that I don't need to stuff food in here. I need to give my digestive system a rest, and I need to, naturally rebalance. So we have these natural incentive, disincentive mechanisms in all natural systems, the human body, the economy, and all this sort of stuff. When we start to try and artificially induce incentives, as you said, like there's no need to artificially induce someone to fucking eat. Like they're going to go and eat. But you definitely need to artificially induce someone to go and buy another car, buy another fucking house, buy another stereo, buy another thing that they don't need, etc., etc., etc. Like that's an artificial induction. And that, once again, is it's much easier done when the money's broken and all that sort of stuff. But I want to say one last thing about the WEF is just, I guess, on the biggest threat. So I think, and I still stand by this, is that, psychopaths, yes, psychopaths are really short-term intelligent and short-term opportunistic, but I think they are long-term the dumbest fucks on the face of the planet, and also the weakest. So when I think about competition, if I want to beat you at something, I don't want to beat you with your hands tied behind your back. Like if we're going to go and have a boxing match and you're going to have your feet tied together or something like that, I didn't. Like that's a fake fucking win. Like a real win. And this is what I love about like the ancients and the old school aristocracy, was that there was a nobility and a class in competing with someone and defeating them because you were better, not because you cheated. And you look at this kind of modern WEF approach, it's an approach to win by cheating. It's the only way they can win, because they are fundamentally a subordinate fucking class of human. They're fucking parasitic, psychopathic pieces of turd, and they cannot compete with any of us on the market. They cannot compete with us, so they have to cheat in order to beat us. So it's kind of like it's a fake victory. It's like anti-stoic, anti-moral, anti-Christian, any useful philosophy or religion that has ever come up throughout history has tried to coach people into thinking about like what being the best version of yourself is. And this kind of modern WEF type philosophy is about short-term opportunistic wins at the expense of someone else through cheating as much as you possibly can, which is a really empty, nihilistic, pathetic form of life. And this is why, like, I don't think they're intelligent. I don't think they're strong. I think they're all like basically these fucking eggshells walking around that have just filled the vacuum, and they will lose because they're up against math, they're up against energy, they're up against time, they're up against entropy, and they're up against people like fucking us who will fucking beat them. Even when the odds and everything is stacked against us, we have time and entropy on our side. Like they have to hold together these institutions, which are taped and band-aided together. And entropy will fucking tear them down, because I don't care as much as you want to believe, politics will turn 2 + 2 into 5. When it comes time to pay the piper, it equals 4. And we're on the side of 4 and they're on the side of 5. And it just, we win in the end.
One thing I wanted to add into that, just about the cheating and whatnot, and actually something that you had said earlier, and you kind of showed the page from the WEF and you showed all the organizations that are involved with that. You just showed the A's and how deep that was. And then going back to this stakeholder capitalism thing, and then the, own nothing and be happy. And so all of this, the cheating that Aleks is talking about, the list of the A's of the people that are trying to take over, the stakeholder capitalism, all of that comes from the fiat money system or the central bank, right? So if you look at an org chart, at the very top of the entire pile is the BIS, which almost nobody knows anything about, the Bank of International Settlements, right? And then below that, you kind of have them the IMF, and then below that you kind of have the NGOs, the WEF, et cetera. And so through the money printer, it enables all this. So two things. One, through the money printer, they choose who to give the money to and who not to, right? And so they want to give the money to the companies that align with them, that will prove to hold up their ideologies, that will build the future they want, not what the public wants through free markets. Mark Carney, who's arguably one of the most influential people in the entire world, said that companies that don't go along with their plans for ESG will be, quote, economic roadkill, meaning they just won't get any funding and they're just going to die out. And so that's like the cheating, and that's what enables all of this to happen at the end of the day, which again kind of goes back to getting rid of that pain point.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about incentivized spending, again, we're back to what kind and to what end. So a lot of times it's not so much an incentivized spending, but I would say then do it without fiat would be a challenge. So if I look at something like, you have a background in real estate, Mark, you were more of a property flipper, but I have some experience with acting as a landlord and holding property, and you don't really make a lot of money renting a property, and it's kind of a pain in the ass. So why would you do it? Because I get the money for almost nothing to finance the property. And eventually, if I do it a couple times, I can get the money for nothing, damn near, in real cost zero. I can shelter the shit out of taxation. I can dispose of income inside there. I can build underlying equity, and I can outsource all the shit to somebody else over time. Now, again, do that without fiat. Or if I want to incentivize farmers to grow grains that can be commoditized, siloed, taxed, quantified, then I can say, if you grow this particular grain at this particular time in this particular way, we'll pay X amount per ton in addition to what you get by the market. And I would say again, then do that without fiat. Those things are not necessarily what the landlord or the farmer is doing in of itself bad, but the mechanism by which the manipulation occurs. If you remove fiat, if you went to a hard monetary instrument, those things become impossible to manipulate and control. And I think one of the interesting things
I would push back on that a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
So the subsidies, for sure, right? So subsidizing farmers to grow corn when we don't need friggin' corn, and mandating that then, the refineries increase their ethanol blend wall from 10% to 15%. Like, that's all fake. That's all creating artificial, and that wouldn't be possible without the fiat, to your point. But as far as like a real estate situation, before there was a fiat money system, people saved money and did loans.
No, I agree with that.
There's always going to be loans out there. So even
just to be clear, Mark, real quick, just to be clear, I'm not talking about owning property. I'm not talking about.
I thought you talked about getting the loan to buy the property, so then you can have the money and the tax incentive.
I'm talking about setting up the entire system so that I can hold 20 properties. I can have massive cash flow out of it. And I could pay I
could still do that on a hard money system, though, is the point that I'm making. So somebody is always going to save more than they spend, right? We're going to produce more than we consume. Somebody's going to do that. And then with that savings, they'll redeploy that capital. So when people come with good ideas, like, hey, I have this good idea, I'll pay you 10% on your money, or 20% or 50% or whatever that number is, people will always be willing to loan that money out. So, hey, I have this idea. You have a bunch of money. You've produced more than you've consumed. You've saved, which has been happening for all of eternity. You've saved. You don't know what to do with it. Well, I have these ideas. Let me go do this thing. I'm going to go buy these properties, fix them up. I'm going to rent them out. I'm going to make, all this money. I'll pay you 10%. You're always going to be willing to loan money in those times. So we've had that forever. So I would still be able to, I believe there would still be credit markets. I believe I would still be able to buy 10 houses if I wanted, as long as I could find a good return. If the market bared that, if it wasn't obviously fake and manipulated, and there was people that had savings would want to loan that out.
But you wouldn't be doing it with 2.5% terms, right?
Well, the market would dictate.
You wouldn't be able to shelter income. Now, I'm for no taxes at all. But if we had a tax-based system like we did, you wouldn't be able to shelter your income inside of there the way it's done right now. That system wouldn't have been incentivized that way.
Sure, the system for sure. The system is super manipulated and it's distorted.
That's what
I was saying. Anytime you create artificial incentives, then you create all types of distortions and manipulations in the market. So that's true, of course.
Yeah. So I'm talking the cheap money and then the tax structure and everything combined. I completely agree with you, dude. That if we got rid of fiat and there was hard money, there would be an equivalent to a mortgage or a real estate investor. Of course, there would. It would just look a hell of a lot different.
Sure.
I wouldn't be walking in and going, I want this property, getting it for zero money down,
And the reason
third
why,
party investor.
that's so important, and this kind of jumps out a little bit out of the book, but we'll hit this point for everybody listening. The reason why that's so important, and I think most people probably listen to this understand that price fixing is a horrible idea. It's been tried numerous times, and we're already there. I was just reading the article this morning that they want to cap the price of energy in Europe, right? So they always want to go to price fixing when they can't control the prices going up. Price fixing always leads to shortages, which leads to more prices going up. And so we understand it's a bad idea, but basically they're setting the price of money, which sets the price of everything.
Correct.
So they are setting the price of everything by setting the price of money. And the reason why that's important is that the price of money gives me all types of data. So most people don't realize that we actually buy money. So if I want to buy this house for $1 million, I don't have $1 million. I have to go buy the $1 million. Well, how much do I pay for $1 million? Well, that's the interest rate. And that interest rate tells me a lot of data. What it really tells me is, are there more savers or spenders? So if there's a ton of people that have saved money, there's more people wanting to lend than there are borrowers, the rate of that money will come down. And if there's not very many savers and there's more people wanting to borrow, the rate of the money goes up. And the reason why that's important is, if I'm going to go take on this loan to create this widget, if there's a lot of money on the sidelines to loan to me, then I know that the economy is good. I know there's lots of savers. I know there's lots of disposable income to buy my products. And so then I'll go ahead and I'll move forward with that business opportunity. Or if there was no money available to me, then I would know the economy is bad. There's no disposable income. I probably shouldn't do it. And so when you manipulate it, to your point, you give away trillions of dollars, zero down interest. Yeah, the whole thing gets manipulated and ruined.
Can we move towards some solutions at this point? We've done a pretty good job of defining the problems and what's going on out there. I try to, in my work, try to provide 2 or 3 solutions to every problem. These are some big globalized problems, but I think the solution often lies in individual actions. What would you tell people that are concerned about all those things we're talking about today, and they're worried about owning nothing and being happy? And, to Alex's point, like, I agree that long-term we win. I try to teach 7 generational thinking. I think the psychopath thinks maybe 2, maybe about their kids, maybe, right? And if I get enough, then my kids will have whatever is left when I'm dead. So maybe. The longer out we think, the more likely we are to win. But you can still be in the worst time in that bubble period of time where the bad guys have the advantage. And so when you were talking about some of this stuff, Mark, I was thinking about a friend I have who was a member of actually the KGB in Soviet Russia prior to the fall, and then left afterwards. And he was also an Olympic athlete. And we were talking one time, and he said, "Do you know why we won so many gold medals?" And I said, "No." And this is pure communism as far as the government goes, but the philosophy of the athlete was different. And it was because most people try to win in these sports. We were trained to survive. And if I survive long enough, you'll make a mistake. And then when you make a mistake, then I'll win. Now, he was particularly he was a judo athlete, right? So he was particularly into a combat sport where that philosophy works really well. But that's kind of what I'm sensing from this. If we're going to have to think long term, then we have to think survival, as in survival of our way of life, our networks, our people, our wealth, our property, long enough to sustain the failure of the system overall.
Yeah, I think that there's I was going to say that the best solution is find your cliff and jump as soon as possible. But I'm kidding. I think about it in terms of Marty Benton and I were having a conversation, and I think about it in terms of we're going to have to go through this period. And as you said, in the end, we win. It's just this bubble is how bad does this bubble get? How much collateral damage and how much intellectual, social, moral, civilizational, economic capital do we burn through before we kind of reverse it, right? That's really the question. And I guess I wonder one question. I'll throw this one back at you, Jack, before we try and answer some solutions. Is if you think of a graph, so think of like you've got an x-axis, and then you've kind of got on the y-axis is let's just think of the negative end, how bad things can get, right? So time is the x-axis, and y is like things getting bad and then getting good again, right? I kind of think of like the surface area within that curve as the total gross product of suffering, right? How far we sort of stoop down. My intuition tells me that we have two options. We can either kind of have a relatively mild transition, right? And we sort of like the curve doesn't go too bad. Like we don't end up in a fucking total dystopia where no one owns nothing and everything. We kind of manage to reverse it, but it's kind of like milder, but it lasts a really long time. And we make it out the other end. Versus a very sharp drop. And because the drop is like really fucking bad and extreme, the elastic band effect, like we come back out of it relatively quickly because we see how bad it actually fucking is, and there's a natural reversion to that. So you end up with a shorter time frame, but a more drastic, I guess, clown world. But the area under the
curve.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the area under the curve might be the same on both of them.
I got you.
So you kind of get what I mean. So I throwing this at you is like, do you think that is the case? Like, do you think either way we've got the same area under curve? It's just up to us to choose whether we want the sharp drop or the long, or whether we, as intelligent individuals, should be prepared for fucking either.
Yeah. So, I mean, my favorite answer, everybody in my audience knows this, I've been saying it for 14 years, is it depends. Right. And then I always try to clarify that with what it depends upon. So I think in a lot of ways, this may depend upon where. Like we do have, I'm not a rah, wave the flag kind of guy, USA, America guy. Grew up that way, but I've since changed my opinion a little bit. But I do think we have a very unique system of solution in the United States in the form of what's a remnant of a republic, where there is a lot of ability for states to conduct themselves in different ways. So if I'm going to ride this out, as much as I've thought about expatriating due to tax advantages and things like that, the last few years have shown me the advantage of being able to, like, I happen to live in Texas when this started, but if I didn't, I would either be here now or in Florida. And that doesn't mean I would stay there for the rest of my life, right? Like the entire point of that form of governance was maybe the next time something happens, the most stupid controls by government will be in those states. And maybe I would have to go somewhere else. And as much as I homestead and all, I try to keep my life potentially mobile if absolutely necessary. And if we look at the history of the destruction of freedom in countries, the people that always did the best left before it happened, or even within countries. So like the smartest thing you could have done if you didn't want to be part of the Civil War in the United States and you lived in the South, especially like Georgia or the Carolinas, would have been move to Maine before it happened. Right. That would have been the best. I mean, you could say you're a coward. You ran to Canada like we did Vietnam veterans and stuff like that. But like that would have been tactically the best maneuver a person could have made. And so I think that having the ability to do that within your own national borders may make that a little less severe. But I think you're asking about like the whole world, like the overall curve.
Yeah, aggregate. Yeah.
I think it's going to be, let's invoke Ernest Hemingway, gradually, then suddenly, like it may look like it's this, and then there has to be a point, and I don't know how long it is till it happens, but there has to be a cliff point. There has to be a point where this artificial reality just falls apart. The fiat money system we're living in, everybody says 1913, and it did start there, but the current Ponzi version is about 52 years old right now. It started in 1971 when the finality of the gold window was closed. I think that's about how long you get. So exactly what it looks like, I don't know, but I think we're approaching that end. And I think a lot of this stuff that we look at goes the evil overlords, the Dr. Evils, the Bond villains trying to take over the world. And let's be honest, Schwab, you couldn't have wrote a better Bond villain for a character, right?
He's a fucking genius cosplayer, right? I swear to God.
Yeah, but is it that they really do want to take over the world, or is it that they don't want to lose control of the world and they're trying to cobble together anything to maintain control because this system is dying? And when you say system's dying, people take comfort in it. Dying beasts are dangerous. The last thing you want is a lion in a corner that knows it's dead, because it's going to take somebody with it when it goes. And so I don't know if that's an answer you were looking for, but I think we have an acute pain period coming, and I don't know how long it lasts. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about globally, I would say, I've done a lot of traveling. I know Aleks done a lot of traveling. I'm a surfer, so I specifically go to places that are way off the beaten path with dirt roads. And I can tell you there's tons and tons and tons of places, most of the world that would probably not even know if the world collapsed. So The entire system could collapse, come down, the dollar could end, the WEF could collapse, whatever, and a lot of the world wouldn't even know. I go to places all over Mexico and Central America that they're not plugged in with TVs and radio. Like they wouldn't skip a beat, right? They're still in the agrarian stage, right? And so if we're talking globally, most of the developed world wouldn't really notice. Obviously, in the developed world, we're at the highest points. We have the farthest to fall. So I think it's especially bad there. I think in the emerging markets that wouldn't really notice, some of them, there's going to be a lot of problems. We're already seeing this happening in these tier 3 countries where famine's really going to be a big problem. The UN's projecting almost a billion people will starve to death over the next 24 months, like 868 million. And so it's going to be very bad. And as the dollar can continue to inflate, food's going to continue to get more scarce. They're going to have a hard problem. In the developed world, though, I mean, I think things get worse as far as like more censorship, more control, more loss of freedom, things like that. I'm not expecting like mass starvation to happen inside.
I'm not either.
In Europe and the United States. So it would get bad as far as loss of freedom. And I think that's going to accelerate probably over the next couple of years would be my guess. I think, all of us see the inevitability of the collapse of the system. And to your point, if it's 50 years old or however old do you want to call it, 100 years old, the system is dying. Now, how much longer can it go for? I mean, people have been calling for it to collapse for a decade. People have been calling for it to collapse since it started in 1971, right? So we can see that the time is getting shorter. But is it 2 years? Is it 20 years? We don't really know. My guess is I talk about all the time. It's a process. And not an event. So it's a process, not an event, right? And so when the U.S. took over superpower and the reserve currency from the pound sterling, that was about a 40-year process. And so we're witnessing it. We're seeing it happen, and we can see all the signposts happening. We can see that, now there's moving to this multipolar world where we have these BRICS nations, which now with Iran, Argentina joining the BRICS, make up now 50% of the people in the world now are under the BRICS. And more importantly, they control 60% of the gold production. Now they're creating their own payment network, their own currency, and even a competitor to the London Bullion Market Association, the LBMA, which could break the grip of manipulation on the price of gold. So, now we're seeing things kind of come to a head. All the developed world, they're in a very dangerous situation where right now the Fed. So right now with the CPI print yesterday, I mean, if we want to jump to like a macro picture and kind of see what's going on with the CPI print yesterday, was much hotter than anybody expected. As a matter of fact, 47 out of 50 economists that work for the Fed had said it would be less than it was. So everyone's caught off guard. This is going to cause an emergency rate increase, probably 100 basis points on the next one. We're probably going to end up over 4.5% at the Fed funds rate, which then turns into be about $1.5 trillion per year is owed just as interest on the national debt. Now, to put that in terms, that's about 40% of the tax receipts that the government brings in. So 40% of the tax receipts go just to the interest, not including any entitlements, whatever. But the problem is the Fed is hell bent on crushing demand. So when the prices are too high, you have two levers, right? You can add more supply or you can lower demand. And so they're hell bent on crushing demand. So they want to crush the economy, crush your retirement account, crush your real estate. So then that lowers the demand. You buy less stuff. But the problem is when you buy less stuff, 70% of the GDP that you talked about had to always be growing. 70% of the GDP comes from consumer spending.
Correct.
So at a time when 40% of the tax receipts are going to be paying just the interest alone, but now the tax receipts are going to plummet through.
Correct.
So now we're in a situation where now what do you do? So we're only speeding up the inevitable. I think this speeding up is going to bring it to a head, and I expect some big fireworks, some big cracks to happen.
Here's a crazy theory I have as to how they try to mitigate this. Everybody's talking about CBDCs. I see an alternative to that. And I'm not saying this is good. I'm just saying this would be the play. So we have these instruments like Tether, right? And TUSD and things like that. And there's been talk of bringing them in under FDIC. So imagine that you, coming from the Fed, coming from the SEC, et cetera, decide that's what you're going to do. And you say, we are going to say, if you want to create a stable coin, you have to exist under FDIC. And you have to insure depositors up to $250,000. And now you have people all over the world with their current, as bad as our currency is, their currency is worse. And with a little box, they can hold and transact in US dollars. And then I'm not saying it would work. This would be the play.
Well, it's already working.
We globalize the dollar through these synthetic dollars. Even with this massive quantity we've created, we spread out the dollar across most of the world. Because if you're in some third world country right now and you can hold US dollars, you're probably going to do so. And if you could do so under a 10 default legitimacy of the state, right, and this neo-fascist organization of the Federal Reserve and the government and the corporatocracy all working together, then you could spread, and maybe you stave this off in their minds anyway for a time. And I've been told I'm absolutely crazy for that belief that they're just going to do a CBC and track everything we do. And I'm like, well, you could do this and track everything we do at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they'll pick the easiest method of doing it. Whether that's using a dollar stable coin, whether it's partnering with Ethereum to create a new one, whatever the case is. They're in a position where they need to look for solutions to try and salvage the clusterfuck, because it's a disaster. So yeah. So at this point, I wouldn't be surprised at anything. But yeah, once again, I mean, coming back to your other question, like for this last couple minutes, I think the solutions, we all know what the fucking solutions are. It's just a matter of actually working towards them. I think a lot of us have heard, buy Bitcoin, get some meat, build some relationships with, community people, get yourself a fucking embassy, think about privacy, coin join your coins, cold store the shit, like all the stuff, right? Like go and learn some other skills, learn to protect yourself, get some ammunition, etc. Like I think we all know that. I guess my call to action is for people to like actually go and fucking do it and quit talking about it and sitting there watching podcasts about it. Like go and actually do it. And take some steps towards it. Like you don't have to have everything. It doesn't have to be perfect. But start putting yourself in a situation where either you're really, really light and you can move quickly, or you dig yourself in somewhere and you have all the shit that you need so that you can hunker down. Because maybe coming back to your thing about what you said about the Soviet athletes, now maybe we need to take a leaf out of their book and survive long enough for the clusterfuck to collapse, and we come out the other end.
Mark, how are you setting your live up? I mean, you seem pretty clear on what's going on. You think forward. You see how this could impact your life. What is your advice to people?
So I think the first thing people have to figure out is like where they're at, where they're trying to go, kind of a thing. We're all in different places. We're all trying to go different places. We all have different modes of transportation. So I have more money. I have less money. I'm older. I'm younger. I want to go here. You want to go, right? We're all different. So first you got to kind of figure out, I at my place in Texas, I have this, ex-Navy SEAL author, Clay Martin. He's helping me set up like some gun ranges, tactical stuff. And the first thing he asked me is, he said, what do you think is going to happen and what do you want to be prepared for? Because based off of that, then I can give you a plan for that, right? So that's the first thing you have to figure out. What do I think is going to happen and what do I want to prepare for, so you can make a plan? So we all have different visions of this. In my vision, what I think is happening is, as I've already kind of alluded to, I see more squeezing by the government, more loss of freedom. I think that's going to continue. This dying beast is going to continue to squeeze to try to hang on to power. The more they squeeze, the more people push back. So times are going to get very volatile. We're already seeing this all over the world. So if you're paying attention, not to mainstream media, but like on Twitter, for example, you can see nations around the world are erupting. I mean, millions of people are marching all over the world. So the more they squeeze, the more it's pushing back. I think it's inevitable what's going to happen, as we said, right? The situation with the fiat currencies, they're in a really, really dangerous situation. And so at this point, anything they do is going to speed up the demise. I think most likely, the most probable case, I guess, specifically for people in the United States, I think there's probably a pretty good sized correction crash coming to asset prices. And I say the asset prices in quotation marks because the inflation, the CPI, the inflation, the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve is what they say committed to bringing down. That's consumer prices. They don't consider your stocks and your real estate, your assets. They don't consider that into the CPI. So they can crush assets, but prices, CPI could still be going up at the same time, which is what I expect to happen. So they're committed to bringing down inflation by crushing asset prices. I would expect that they're going to do so, and asset prices will continue to crash. Probably another big crash from here. Maybe this goes on somewhere in the next like six months to maybe a couple years. What we've seen is that each crash has lasted less and less and less because the Fed is more willing to intervene. And so we saw, in 2008, it took like almost 6 years for the market to get back to its previous all-time high. I think this time, maybe it's 2-3 years. So maybe there's a 2-3 year kind of period that we see this big asset drawdown. At that point, the Fed will be forced, I think all the central banks will be forced to inflate their way out of this. No nation with a money printer has ever defaulted on their debt. It just won't happen. You're going to print your way out of it. But I think people need to understand that there's two types of busts. So most people just think about this deflationary bust where everything just goes to zero and I have no money, I can't afford to live. But there's also an inflationary bust. And so that means that they print so much money that the prices of things go up so much that I still can't afford to live. So in Zimbabwe, for example, not ancient news, we're just talking about in 2000, so not that far ago,
20 years.
It was $350 billion for one egg. Everybody was a billionaire, but you couldn't afford to live. So there's an inflationary bust or a deflationary bust. I think we'll go into an inflationary bust. So I think we'll see, asset prices, cost of goods, everything goes up. And so what you really want to be thinking about is your cost, your purchasing power. And so you need to maintain your purchasing power, and you need to at least keep up with, if not beat, that rising water, right? So you're trying to keep your head above water, but it's going up so fast. So you don't want to end up being a billionaire and still not being able to afford an egg. And so for me, my game plan is I think we're going to continue to see markets going down. It's not a contrarian bet to say that. The Fed tells you just as much. Jerome Powell said yesterday that he's committed to bringing down inflation. Well, I don't think they're going to be able to. So I think it's a losing battle, but they're going to try. So we're going to see asset prices come down. I'm pretty heavy in cash right now. I'm not redeploying any capital right now. I'm not selling any of my Bitcoin, but I'm not redeploying it. So I'm trying to build those cash positions. Cash is trash, sure, but for short periods of time, always ask the question over what time frame. So I think over the next 6 to 12 months, cash is a pretty good situation, a pretty good place to be. We'll wait until probably I'm looking at the credit markets, so the bond markets, so like a high yield and investment grade debt. I'm looking at the commodities, specifically industrial metals like copper. And then I'll be looking at the stocks. And so when those three things, when industrial metals and the bond markets bottom, that'll probably give us a signal that the Fed's going to pivot. And at that point, then it's trying to go back in and try to keep your head up with that rising water, which is going to be very difficult. So for example, if I was going to buy a home 5 years ago for $100,000, but I decided not to buy that home. Well, today it now costs me $500,000. Well, I can't afford to get in at $500,000. But if I would have bought at 100 and ridden it all the way up to 500, when I sell that home for 500, I can only just go buy another home for 500. So I didn't get ahead. All I did was keep up with it. So you want to keep up, but you want to beat it. And so you want the assets that will do that. So one, I like leverage. Leverage is dangerous. I think of leverage like a fire. It can warm your house or it can burn it down. But like back to real estate, if I can get a low interest rate loan, even today at 5% is still amazing low when inflation is well over 10%, not per the CPI numbers, but I think it's 17-20% most likely. But if I can lock in low interest rate debt, that gives me that leverage that I need to try to keep up ahead of that. I think other assets, obviously Bitcoin, I think will have this massive run. We can see how exponential those returns get when it starts moving back up again. And so you want to start thinking about, one, protecting yourself right now. Cash positions are good. Reduce your exposure. We have massive uncertainty and volatility, at least in the next couple months to the election, but probably over the next year. And then at that point, you're going to want to get back in and ride it back up, but try to think about beating inflation and not just keeping your head above water.
No, I agree with that. And I've always said, like, the cost of capital is the opportunity rent that you pay, basically. So if I'm holding cash during an inflationary period, and I know it's going to be devalued over a particular period of time, I'm staying in that cash and I'm paying that fee so that I have the opportunity on the other side of the cycle, where if I tied that capital up in that point and it declined with it, now I'm stuck and that capital is now stranded capital. and I can't recoup that capital. It's too expensive to recoup. Sometimes maybe even have to bite the bullet and do it, because then you get into the sunken cost fallacy. But it's a fallacy, but it's a real effect that I now have. I've lost that opportunity. So if I know that capital is going to be devalued by 20%, do I still have a greater than 20% opportunity on the other side of it? And then something you said that I've been talking about a lot recently is these people losing their mind over 5 to 6% mortgages. Most of my adult life, that was considered a good mortgage rate. When I bought my first home, I think I paid like 5.8 or something like that. Inflation was a lot less than it is now. Nobody said that was a bad interest rate to get on a mortgage. Now we're going back to like late 90s here. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we look at things like that and we think it's bad, that tells us where we are.
Totally. Gents, I've got to run. I had a hard stop about a minute ago. So thank you so much, Jack, for having me on. Mark, I'll let you take over. Really appreciate it. Chat to you soon, guys.
Alex. We'll make sure Mark pushes your book for you good.
Alex. Yeah, I had budgeted an hour, and now we're well into an hour and a half. So I got to wrap it up as well. I got a big day ahead of me.
Let's get a good pitch on the book.
But yeah, get the book, the UnCommunist Manifesto. Check it out. It's not a big, overwhelming book. It's more of a booklet. We think that some of the best books in history are booklets, short and concise. The original Communist Manifesto was only 78 or 8,000 words. Other great books like Frederick Bastiat's The Law or Rothbard's Anatomy of the State, they're booklets. So you can read this in about an hour and a half probably. So it's not overwhelming. And I think you can get a couple good ideas. More importantly, I think it breaks it down to what we would consider like a first principles level. So you can understand things at their most basic. So then you can start to formulate and build your own ideas on top of it. So that's the plug for the book.
Outstanding. Again, thank you so much for being with us, Mark. I really appreciate you joining Alex and myself. I considered it a huge bonus when he mentioned that you could be here today. You want to maybe throw out a plug for your own work, though, here before we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. So I put out a ton of content. You can just go to onemarkmoss.com, onemarkmoss.com, and you can find everything. But I put out a couple of 3 videos a week on my YouTube channel. Just search Mark Moss. I have a nationally syndicated radio show. You could just search Mark Moss Radio. I got a podcast. You can find it on any of your podcast players, iTunes, iHeart, etc. Just search Mark Moss on there. Or like I said, just go to onemarkmoss.com, and then I have everything linked right there. But I put out a couple of videos a week that are videos on YouTube where they're like on my whiteboard, and I have like what I call the receipts. So I got charts and graphs and headlines and stuff that I bring in. So definitely check that out.
Appreciate it. I'll make sure that I have all of that information, including Alex stuff, Mark stuff, links, Twitter connections, all that in the show notes for the podcast. There's a link in the video notes below right now. If you're on the live feed, about 1 hour after we close down right here, that will be available on the audio side and on my site, and you'll be able to get all of those links, download the episode. Remember, check us out on Fountain FM. And again, Mark, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you.